This
Hello,
conference
everyone.
will
We're going to be
now be
recording this.
recorded.
Oh, someone pressed record already. I always like how that was me. Anyways, hello, everyone. We are live, and this is the Kubernetes Corner first show. Okay, and for this first show, we decided to go to the other end of the earth to interview somebody, not physically, unfortunately. I think that's next time, I'm hoping, right? We just have to get the credit card going. So we have Andre Atkinson here, okay, and he is in Australia. What city again, Australia?
I'm based in Perth, Australia, so it's Western Australia, all
Wow.
the way on
So
the other side.
9 p.m. there or 9:10
Yep,
and 9:10 a.m. here. So I'm glad I
yep.
don't work for an Australian company.
Opposite ends.
Yeah. Anyway, so what we're going to do today is we brought Andre in because I personally think that he's going to represent a lot of people in the very near future. He's worked in IT for a long time. He's been a very successful IT person and has gotten a lot of before that certifications, whatnot. And then he started the journey to Kubernetes, and he's already attained the certified Kubernetes administrator certification, and recently the Red Hat Linux one. So I think this
Yep.
is good because people are asking questions about. I have this asked to me quite often. How do I do this? What do I do? I got a full-time job. When can I have time to learn this? So why don't we do this, Andre? Why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll ask a few questions and go from there.
Sure. So, hey everyone, my name's Andre Atkinson. As Jeff mentioned, I'm based in Perth, Australia. So I'm currently a principal platform specialist for Datacom, working in the automation space. And probably about a year ago, got into the whole Kubernetes world that Jeff mentioned, coming off the back of backups and storage and virtualization, and yeah, essentially decided containers sounded interesting and moved into that world.
And where did you start your IT career? Like from the very, and why? That's another question people ask. Why did you go into computers? And yeah, I need to put bread on the table, It's like,
Yeah, the why IT is always the interesting one. I was just always good with computers, pretty much, and that I played a lot of games, so IT just seemed like a an interesting journey to go on. Actually, originally didn't start in IT. I actually decided to study law at university, and decided that didn't quite work out for me. So
wow.
went went back into IT and got started there. So yeah, my career started with Dimension Data actually in New Zealand when I lived there, on a service desk, basically answering phones, providing level one support. Yeah, very quickly moved up into more of a like level two system engineering position. Um, got an opportunity to start working in storage. So got involved in Dell EMC storage and backups, did a bit of Commvault backups at the time. And that's sort of started me on the journey with Veeam as well, and how I got introduced into that. Um, from there, I then moved to Australia, where I still am. So I've been here for 5 years now. Took a position as a backup and storage engineer again, focusing on Veeam and Dell EMC, and then managed to work my way into the private cloud space. So as an infrastructure engineer working on virtualization, so VMware Stack, again, Dell EMC storage on the back end, Veeam backups. Yeah, and essentially got me into the automation space where I am now.
Wow. And you know what's really interesting about your story, and I think a lot of us can relate to it, is that you didn't start in IT. So there's so many IT people who are now top level professionals who said, well, I started doing something else. I personally was a linguist before. And so this is good because it's showing the journey. You started not in IT, then you went into IT, and now you've moved to Kubernetes. So I can see a lot of people following that path. Now, Kubernetes, we know, is very heavily influenced by Linux. How long have you been working with Linux for?
Yeah, so honestly, not that long. As most of us are, we were obviously either backups or storage or Windows engineers before this. So dabbled with Linux throughout the years, playing with it both on a personal and a professional level. So, installing Linux Mint on or Ubuntu on old laptops and just learning how it all works, to using obviously Red Hat in a bit more of a professional capacity. But basically, with starting in the automation space and starting in that Kubernetes space is really where I got my teeth sunk into Linux. So it's really only been about the last year and a half I've really gotten deep into the Linux world. Because again, us coming from a Windows background, it was always very alien. Like, how do I start this? Where do I start? And there's so many different distributions and so many different ways it can go that it was very daunting to sort of just pick it up and start running with it.
Yeah, yeah. And I forgot to mention, of course, you're a Veeam Vanguard, so you've been working with Veeam for a while. When do you start working with Veeam? And I know you mentioned that other company, but I've worked with them as well. When did you start with Veeam, and what did you like about Veeam? Because that's kind of a pre-question to everything else.
Yeah, yeah, no problem. So I started working with Veeam probably about 5 years ago, when I started as a backup and storage engineer in Australia, and then got into Veeam, started playing around with it. I had never really used it before that, and just absolutely fell in love with the product, just the absolute simplicity of it, that I could pick it up. Awesome front end, obviously. Console worked beautifully, and just every time we did deployments, we did patches, it just worked. As the Veeam slogan goes, it just works. That was 100% my experience with it. Every time I touched it, it was just fantastic. Uh, the Veeam crew as well, the local team here in Perth were amazing as well. So the vendor relationship was just really, really good. Um, and that's actually what got me onto becoming a Vanguard. So they sort of put my name forward and said, "Look, this sounds really awesome. Is this something you're interested in doing?" And I just jumped at the opportunity. I was so excited to do it and so honored that I was nominated. Yeah, so I've been a Vanguard for 3 years now. So it's
Wow.
my third year in the program, and hopefully here for many more.
Wow, that's excellent. Yeah, and so I'm asking that question because we all know that Veeam bought Kasten, and of course Kasten backs up Kubernetes. So that's kind of leading into that. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, which I think is probably one of the most important questions, is what do you think? And this depends on people I've asked. Different people answer different ways. What do you think the biggest challenges are for people starting their journey into containers and Kubernetes?
Yeah, it's a great question. Just starting, to be honest. I know that sounds like a bit of a cliche answer, but the most challenging part is actually just picking it up and starting. Um, Also, the mind shift change, like, pulling from my own personal experience, I always thought containers was going to be a bit of a fad. We were in the virtualization world, and it's virtual machines, and it's how we've been doing it. And I was like, oh, this container thing, like, that everyone keeps on talking about, sounds like a new cool toy, and we'll just leave it at that. I was clearly wrong, and it became a lot bigger than what I thought it was going to go. And I had to make that mind shift change, which a lot of people I think struggle with. So it's just broadening that mind shift from, right, this is virtualization, this is how we're doing it, this is traditional, I guess, in quotations, to this is the brave new world, and we're going in that direction.
When
Um,
was the first time? When was the first time you heard about Kubernetes? That's always a question that I ask because people sometimes say, "Well, I thought it was in a Greek restaurant or something," and someone said.
It was actually through the Vanguard program. That's what
Oh,
got
wow.
me interested in it. So we had obviously heard about it at work, and we've heard some of the DevOps guys talk about it. And as I mentioned, I thought it was sort of a fad, and I didn't really think it was going anywhere. And then through the Vanguard program, when Veeam bought Kasten, I was like, all right, cool. This is something interesting. I can get involved in this. Um, and it seemed like a great opportunity to do some blog posts as well and learn something new, because obviously then in my professional life, it started coming up more often, and people were talking about it, and customers were saying, "Oh, what's this Kubernetes thing we're hearing about?" And it was very apt timing, because at the time when I sort of started this journey, Michael Cade was a few months ahead of me with his journey, so his blogs were of great help in me getting started. So I basically was following along with what he was doing and learning what he was doing, um, and then getting involved in the cast and stuff. So the cast and acquisition was actually a bit of a driver for me to get involved in the Kubernetes world.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because that I've heard other people say that Veeam people, well, people work with Veeam, saying, I heard about Kubernetes, but then when Veeam bought Kasten, it was like, uh-oh, I better do something. So you've got a bunch of certifications, I take it, right? Either IT
Yeah.
certifications, Windows ones, and Red Hat. Um, how does it compare? Because you did the certified Kubernetes administrator certification, and
Yep.
I think you did that before the KCNA came out. Now, to tell people out
Yep.
there, KCNA is this new certification that Linux Foundation has brought out because the certified Kubernetes administrative certification is quite difficult. And people were saying, well, we need some kind of an entry level. It's not fair because people are scared of Kubernetes to begin with, and then you show them this and they just turn and run. So how does it compare, and what did you do to prepare, and what would you recommend people to do to get that that certification, or should they not need that certification? They should go for the KCNA.
Yeah, it really depends on the level on where you're starting. I absolutely think it was a great thing of them introducing the KCNA, more of that basic 101 level, I guess, if you want to call it that, starting there. Because again, as we said, a lot of us come from either a storage or a networking or a Windows background. So the learning curve to get into DevOps is massive. It's a massive learning curve to get into because it's not just Kubernetes, right? It's Linux and it's everything else to get your head around all of that. It's an entirely new world. And for most of us, like it was for me, it was essentially a career shift change because I went from storage and backups into containers and Linux and automation. So it was essentially a full-on career change for me. So yeah, you mentioned the CKA exam. Yeah, so I did that a while ago, and it's probably, beside that and the Red Hat exam, have been probably my favorite exams ever that I've done. I've done a whole bunch throughout my career, but the fact that they were practical exams was just amazing, and I really feel like every vendor should go in that same direction, having a practical exam. So the CKA, I believe, was a 2-hour practical exam where you actually log into a live active lab and they give you a bunch of tasks and you have to go through and do those tasks. Much the same as the Red Hat exams that I did. So I've done both the Red Hat Certified Administrator and I just recently did the Red Hat Certified Engineering one as well, which was amazing, by the way. That was a really, really cool exam. Lots of Linux and lots of Ansible, which is really cool for that automation space. But again, that was a 4-hour practical exam with a live
Oh.
environment. Yeah, yeah, very long. My brain was broken after those 4 hours, that's for sure.
And that
Um,
was a remote, right? That was a proctored
yeah,
exam. Where they say,
correct.
take
Yeah,
the camera, put it under the table, put it behind your
yep.
ear. You don't have, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to have two webcams. So you have to have the one on the camera looking
Two.
at your face. Yeah, and you have to have an external webcam that's got a cable on it so that you can move that around and show your room. And then you have to put it there in a manner that it shines on your keyboard so they can actually see like what you're
Yeah,
typing
yeah.
as well as your face. It's
And
pretty hectic.
someone told me you can't have a wireless mouse. Is that true?
No, no wireless mouses at all. Mouse or keyboard has to all be cabled.
So
And
you know
it
why
boots.
that is,
Yeah,
though. It's because someone's tried to cheat. Obviously, someone in the other
yeah,
room with a boosted, I guess, a power boosted US like Bluetooth mouse, and the guy's sitting there, moving the thing. I
yeah.
guess.
That's the only thing I could think of as well. There must have been something like that, but yeah, they HDMI screen scraper. Yeah, could be something.
Rick
Yeah,
seems to be
trying
a
to.
bit of an expert on this. I'm a little bit worried.
Yeah,
You know,
he needs to teach us his tricks, I reckon.
yeah.
um, yeah, so that, like I said, that was a 4-hour exam. But again, it was full on practical. It was, you log in. It's a live environment. They give you a bunch of tasks, and you go through the tasks. What was really cool about the CKA exam is that you actually had internet access as well, and you were able to access the Kubernetes documentation.
Yeah.
So it was basically like kubernetes.io / whatever the docs were, and you could log in and read the documentation, which was awesome. That
Yeah.
was, like I say, every vendor I personally feel should be following that direction and doing that because there's virtual appliances for almost everything out there these days. So it just makes sense going that way.
And it's practical
Um,
too. Okay, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
no, no, go for it.
Oh, so one of the things that I also heard, which is good compared with those exams, the practical ones, is that the philosophy is they're going to put time pressure on you, and they're going to make sure you know what the knowledge, but also you can efficiently and quickly execute because they're simulating a real P1 situation. There are a lot of people I think who are brilliant certification, performers, but in real life it's like the mouse in front of the headlights. So I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, look, again, I think for both the CKA and the Red Hat exams, it was probably the first time in my life I ever used all of my time for an exam. The CKA especially, I used the entire 2 hours. I think I finished with like 2 minutes to spare or something. It was crazy. I walked out of that when I finished the exam. I sat back and I was like, right, I need a drink. That was hectic. That was a very long
I'll kill
two
those brain
hours.
cells that I just, yeah. So one
Yeah.
question there, how did you prepare for the CK? Because that's another question that I've had from a lot of people who there are people who have really set up a great system to win at multiple choice exams. So in other words, they've got us. I'm one of the people who used to do that. I'd have a whole system that I set up, little flashcards, whatever, and it would be totally memorized. And then I go and then the guessing game if I had to. You can't do that with a CK, right?
No,
So what did you do to prepare,
absolutely.
and how long did it take? And you were working a full time job too, right? That's the other thing to mention.
Yeah, yeah. So probably took me about 6 months to prepare for it. And like I say, at the time, Michael Cade was a few months ahead of me of doing this, so I was following his blogs quite religiously to understand how it works. And for me, I'm a very hands-on, practical sort of guy. So it started out with how do I build a cluster? Sorry, just watched a whole bunch of YouTube videos and basically from there figured out how to do it and when to build a cluster, got it up and running. I think it sort of worked and went, cool, now I need to learn how to do this properly. So obviously the Kasten learning site was great help. That log in free um, lab environments that you can go through as well, which was a great help. But for me, one of the main learning sites that I use, and it's not a plug because I don't get paid by them, but was Code Cloud. I used Code Cloud
Yeah.
quite heavily, and they were fantastic. It was basically log in live environments. You could spin them up, blow them away, and just go from there. And then obviously plural sites and Udemy as well. But between the Kasten learning sites and Code Cloud was probably the two main resources for me.
Mhm. And I guess one of the important things to mention here is if you combine, be it Code Cloud or be it the two ones they give you now on the Linux Foundation site when you buy an exam, practice exams are very important. Um, because obviously some people, if they've never been in that situation before, it's difficult. So one other question about the proctoring: how much fun did you have? I also during COVID did a bunch of exams, and I had all sorts of wild and crazy experiences. Sometimes I used up all my nervous energy just dealing with the proctors. Like, So how was your experience? Maybe I look suspicious. That was my. Oh, look at this guy. Oh no, we better. Okay.
Yeah, maybe I must too because I agree. Yeah, it was like, can you hold the camera? Can you move it under your desk? Can you show me the top of the desk? Can you show me the back of your laptop? I was like, I just want to write this exam, man. I'm already
Yeah, yeah.
stressed enough, and now you're making it 10 times worse. Like you say, like you burn up all your energy. By the time you get to the point of writing the exam, you're so spun out. You're like, oh, okay, just take a deep breath, relax, calm down, and
Yeah,
get
yeah.
into it.
So you've done the CKA. Are you thinking of doing any more going forward? Because I know like there's all sorts. I mean, there's distribution ones. There's the CKS. Um, I know. I don't know. Actually, yeah, VMware have something. It's not called the Tanzu exam, but it's called the Cloud something or whatever. And you have to have the CKA first to attempt that one. But that's a multiple choice, which I found was kind of interesting. It's like,
Yeah, for me personally, sort of going down this the automation route with Red Hat and drinking a bit of the Red Hat Kool-Aid is OpenShift, right? I love OpenShift. I think it's a fantastic distribution, and I'm planning on doing that. So that's the next one. So there's a few of those exams. I think there's about 2 or 3 exams, which again are all practical exams that I need to do. So I don't know if I'd get it done this year. Just looking at the calendar, it's already the 8th month. Probably won't happen this year, but maybe next year I'll look at doing the OpenShift stuff. I know
and would
you've
you
been playing
agree?
around with OpenShift recently as well, haven't you?
Yeah, no, I've been playing, and I agree with you fully because it's hard sometimes to explain to people who are new to Kubernetes that Kubernetes itself is like this, and then there are things that are built on top of it, kind of like Linux and distributions. So one of the things I was going to ask you too, because I've seen some people saying, well, maybe someone can explain this from a vSphere point of view or from a Hyper-V point of view or something like that. I tend myself to disagree with that somewhat because I think that the foundations are so different. They would be better to start with the foundations and then go into distribution territory, Tanzu and OpenShift. What do you think that or as well, or
Yeah, I agree. Look, how I sort of approach it at a bit of a high level when the conversation comes up is it is easy to try and compare it to the VMware world, and I agree with you. They are vastly different worlds, but I sort of go Docker is your ESX hosts and Kubernetes is your vCenter, and that
yeah?
that seems to click for people when you talk about it like that because you go like Kubernetes is just that management control plane, and that does all the orchestration and all of that. It's not the actual thing doing it. It's you've obviously got Docker underneath, which is doing a lot of the work in terms of the container stuff. But yeah, I find getting that conversation from here's what it looks like in the VMware world, and this is sort of what it looks like in the container world. I realize you obviously can't. There's not a one-to-one comparison, but it helps to bridge that gap a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So one thing I was asking too is because you've done all these exams and things, how much now is your daily work involved with Kubernetes? Have you seen it grow? Do you expect it to grow?
Yeah, so I work with Kubernetes now on a day-to-day basis, especially in the automation world now that I've been brought into, which has been interesting. A lot of DevOps and stuff. So yeah, work with it daily. Look, to be honest, from a growth perspective or an adoption perspective in the professional world, haven't seen as much as what I probably thought I would have. But then again, I am based in Western Australia, which likes to adopt tech 5 years slower than everyone else in the world.
I was like
So we
Canada.
probably, yeah. So we're probably a few years behind that. So I'm probably sure you're seeing a bit more Kubernetes out in the wild than I am. But the conversations are starting. We're starting to get a lot of interest in it. There's a lot more talks going on about it. The Kasten stuff has been a great help because people never thought or never understood that they had to actually back up their containers because we still have the whole arguments about everything is stateless, and it's like, well, these days it's not. You're now running stateful workloads in your containers. You're running Mongo databases or MySQL DBs, etc., in your containers. So you actually need to back them up now, which has been a great entry point into that conversation for some people. Um, and just automation as a whole, the customers or businesses are now starting to think, how can they actually automate processes, stuff that's been taking, burning FTE hours to do. How can you free up an engineer by automating a particular process to get a more efficient business outcome at the end of the day? So businesses overall, as far as what I can see, personal opinion, I can see that they're starting to think a little bit more about continuous development, that continuous integration and continuous development, and how can we automate things, and how can we get to that future-proof business and start working towards a bit more of a modern architecture.
And this actually comes back to this whole educational journey question, because one of the arguments that I've heard, or one of the things impeding the expansion of Kubernetes, is the lack of skill sets. There's just not enough people. So businesses want to move forward, but they've not enough people. So that's why it's so important that people move forward. As far as the implementation and people knowing about it, I always use the Pokemon Go story, because people, that game that people walk into walls and
Yeah, yeah.
stuff. So that ran on Kubernetes and it never went down. And the thing
Oh
about
wow.
that, which is fascinating, yeah, the fascinating is that it was a very difficult application, despite being a little silly, because suddenly you'd have 1,000 people show up at one location. We have a ferry dock in downtown Toronto, and for some reason, all the little monsters or whatever they were used to show up there. And so you get suddenly this huge influx of people there. And you'd think, well, any normal application might be overloaded or whatever, but because
Mm.
Kubernetes can auto scale, and it never went down. So you tell people like, wow, Pokemon Go was on Kubernetes. Oh, well, in that case. Um, but yeah, so that's interesting. So I kind of same thing here in Canada when you talk about expansion. I think more of it's coming in the States. I've noticed that it's moving
Yeah.
fast. So I think it's going to come eventually. But what about your colleagues? And I have seen personally a fear, a fear. There's a fear of missing out, and there's a fear of, I did all this VMware stuff for years and I thought I was finished, and they're telling me I need to do something brand new. Do people ask you this? Do you sense this?
Yeah, definitely. So there's obviously like the team that I'm part of is very much focused on automation and Kubernetes and all that. So the conversation doesn't come up too much with them. But yeah, definitely with some of the more traditional storage and backup or virtualization engineers like VMware, like you say, they've worked very, very hard to get where they are, to build up the skill set. And it's almost akin to the physical versus virtualization. When everything went virtual, everyone that had spent years and years perfecting the physical infrastructure had now gone, right, now we have to adapt and overcome and learn how all this virtualization thing works. I think it's very much in a very similar mindset at the moment to containers and Kubernetes as a whole. Everyone's sort of going, well, virtualization has dominated for so many years and will continue to dominate. I definitely don't see it going away. It will be a bit of a marriage between the two. But yeah, it's it's adapting and picking up a new skill set, and that does scare some people. Like they they scared of the journey to go down it. I mean, and I was 100%. I definitely was when I started going down it. There was doubts and going, is this the right idea? Should I be doing this or should I be focusing on something else? So I can understand where they're coming from with that.
Yeah, because there's definitely a deficit, a time deficit. And again, I go back to the fact that people are working full time. They might have other, family responsibilities. So there's always a question of how do you go about incorporating this? And so I know that in my situation, I would like do make 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes a day, and I try to put a cap on it. Did you do something similar, or did your workplace actually say, okay, Andre, we want you to go to this direction. Here's like half the day to do it. And do you think that many companies will do that? That's the
Yeah, it's a great question with the time because I get that all the time. It's a bit of a running joke and around all the exams that I write because it takes time, right? Like I said, the Red Hat one that I did recently was probably about 100 hours worth of prep and lab environments and everything that I spent going through that, doing all of that. And look, I just had a baby last year, so he's 8 months old at the moment. So trying to squeeze that in between having a family life as well as working a full-time job. I think I owe my wife a few flowers at this point for for covering some duties whilst I sit and study. But yeah, look, the company I work for has been great as well. I've got a really good boss that's been very supportive of my training and my upskilling, so that's been good. But for the most part, it's all been out of hours. It's all been my own hours going through it, especially when I started on the Kubernetes journey originally, because that wasn't in scope for the particular role that I had. I obviously learned Kubernetes and that outside of becoming part of the DevOps world. So it obviously helped me getting there, but I had to sit and do it all myself. So yeah,
Yeah, and that's one
that's
thing. One thing I'd underline here too for people is that you can create your own role right now at this point in time. It's very similar to what people are telling me when virtualization started. The people who were kind of jumping in front of the train, they created their own jobs and basically for 10 years in advance solidified their position. So that's another stimulant to actually do this because obviously after work you want to go home and sleep and or do something else and study Kubernetes. Are you nuts? But a little bit of investment can pay off. So I wanted to also ask you more now about Kasten, since you pointed out a couple really interesting things, and I have to mention one thing here, just a funny story quickly about Veeam, because a number of years back, I had started looking at containers, and we had some big Veeam people come to our company I used to work at, and one of these people, who I don't think works for Veeam anymore, I said, well, do you think you're going to start backing up Kubernetes and containers or Docker Swarm at time? No, why would you do that? They're stateless, right? So exactly what you said. I don't think this person works for Veeam anymore, so maybe they just boom. I don't think so, but it was a very at the time attitude that, well, why would you back these up? So then they decide we need to back these up. And when did you first hear about Kasten? Was it before the partnership? Because let's go back memory lane. There was Kasten, then there was a partnership when they were kind of like dating, so to speak, fiance, and then Veeam bought them. And so when did you first hear about Kasten?
it was probably around the time of the acquisition, I think. So it obviously the conversation had started. I was like Rick, the partner,
There
invest,
we go.
acquire, date, engage, marry. Yeah,
We
it
can do
was
marriage
probably during
counseling
that
now too.
engagement phase. Um, yeah, so like I said earlier, just part of the Veeam Vanguard stuff where it came up, we sort of got a few insights into what was happening and where it was going, and started having a bit of those conversations around that. And again, I at that point hadn't really had much interest or investments into the Kubernetes world, so never really paid much attention to it. Um, and I think it was around the point of the acquisition where it was really highlighted and went, all right, cool, we need to take a look at this.
Yeah. And the thing too, it's interesting about Kasten is that, at least from my perspective, and I'm interested in knowing if you feel the same thing. One of the things that struck me of Kasten before even they were partnering and training with Veeam was it seemed to me very similar kind of philosophy. You can take something underneath that's very complicated, but you can put a UI in front, which is relatively simple. So it's giving access to more people who don't need the deep skills. At the same time, if you become an expert, you can go very deep because I've seen some other products that deal with Kubernetes backup, and some of them you need a PhD in science. It kind of reminds me of a company I used. Well, I didn't work for them, but I worked with their product, and it was they had this one product. It was the name of an Italian city. You probably can guess it, and it starts with an I. And it was just they brought out something for virtualization, and it was just complicated. It was just unnecessarily
Mm.
complicated. I thought, well, maybe they're selling certifications, but Kasten, I liked that, and so I want to know, was that your first impressions when you actually got your hands on Kasten? What do you think?
Yeah, I have to wholeheartedly agree with you. I've used other products as well, and you do need a degree in some of them, and you definitely need to be skilled in CLI and all that in some cases. And for some people, that's not a journey they really feel like going down. Uh, Kasten 100% approached it with the same attitude as Veeam in the whole it just works, and that was my experience. It was basically deployed the Helm chart on, well, read the documentation, obviously, for starters, jumped on the Kasten website, read the documentation, went, all right, cool, this is how you install it. Um, Deployed it via the Helm charts, and a few minutes later, I had a web GUI that I logged into. I was like, oh, cool, that's awesome. That was
Yeah,
really easy.
all right.
And basically, and same thing with the GUI. I mean, the GUI is fantastic, super easy to navigate. Everything makes sense where it is. Um, yeah, it was just a really, really good experience installing it and getting it going. And the more I work with it, just the easier it becomes. And like you say, you can 100% deep dive it, and there's so much automation you can do around it as well. You could essentially automate the entire deployments as well as creating your storage profiles and everything. It's sort of just awesome. Really,
I
really good
like the way
product.
they have the little buttons where you can get the YAML and you can get the actual command line code. So if you're a lazy coder like me, you can just copy and paste. So
Yep.
this is a really interesting question for you. What is your wish list? Okay, going forward, Kasten and Veeam, because there is some integration. It's coming more and
Ooh.
more. What would you really want to see? Would you want to see some kind of an Ansible plugin? I mean, something in that department, because I know you're a big Ansible person.
Yeah, Ansible would be quite cool to wrap some stuff around that. Getting an Ansible module to control it and making it all idempotent would be pretty cool. That might be something to work on. But yeah, just if I had to say, probably just a deeper integration with Veeam, as in the VBR console and going that direction, which I know is already happening. There's a lot of cool stuff coming as we know with version 12, and Kasten keeps on moving at such a fast pace, so it's awesome seeing them adding new features in constantly. Uh, yeah, I would just love to see that integration just get even more tighter, that you can sort of control it all from a single pane of glass would be the wish.
Probably the monitoring and reporting would be nice too. That's one kind of personal wish I have, because if it could be
Yeah,
integrated with Veeam One, for instance, or if they could,
yeah,
even Prometheus would be, I mean, that's going a little bit far, but it would be nice. I know that's one thing people, it's not a complaint, and it's certainly not against Kasten because they're using Grafana and they're using Prometheus. But
yeah.
I've heard people say, well, Kubernetes is tough enough, but then Grafana and Prometheus, so whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I've dabbled a bit in it. I know it's something you can't just learn, on a weekend. So I think that's probably
No, no,
something
exactly, and that's what I mentioned earlier about the whole DevOps space. It's not just learning Kubernetes; it's learning everything around it as well. Because once you start down that journey, I'm not a coder. I don't admit to try be a coder. I've only quite recently gotten into coding. Um, but it's coding. You're learning Python. You're learning PowerShell. You're learning CI/CD. It's more than likely either GitHub or GitLab that you're learning, as well as the whole application stack that goes around it. You're learning, like you mentioned, Prometheus and Grafana and all of that, because these are the monitoring tools that you use. So yeah, you're learning an entirely new world, as well
And
as all
Go,
the
don't
products
forget
that go
Go.
along
Go
with it.
language is the
And Go, yep,
yeah.
and Go, yeah. Can't
Yeah,
believe I
that's
forgot
why.
about that one.
Did you follow Michael Cade's 90 Days of DevOps?
Absolutely, yeah, I did.
Yeah, because that I found
That's
was something was definitely missing in the DevOps world because it's so enormous. It reminds me of one of those mosaics you see in if you're in Italy in the museums, a Roman mosaic, and from afar it's like, oh my goodness. And you get closer, but you got to go piece by piece. So he did a really good job of taking people through. And then if you were interested in one area, you could go deeper. He didn't go too deep. He went a little bit shallow to give you an idea of what this is. Have you done any CI/DC stuff or in the programming chain stuff in a Kubernetes cluster?
Yeah, so I always talk about DevOps, and there's It's a bit of a Venus and Mars situation because you're mixing developers and operations guys, and I'm definitely more on the operations side of that family. Um, but it's definitely a match made in heaven, right? We all got to work together, and it's a beautiful combination. But the the programmers need to understand how the ops works, and the operational guys and the infrastructure guys need to understand how the code works, and together they make obviously what is called DevOps and this beautiful new world that we all live in and work in. Um, so yeah, that was a bit of a challenge for me, getting my head around that and getting my head around all the coding and all of that because I didn't come from that background. So I was hopefully I brought a bit of my ops background and my infrastructure background into that, and yeah.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a different mindset. I mean, on the bright side, it's not a different mindset like lawyers and IT people. I actually worked in a law firm once, and I realized that no, there are really different types of humans. Like the lawyers want to work at 2 in the morning. What do you mean you're rebooting the server for maintenance? It's 2 in the morning. I've got a lot of work to do. Oh, okay. Friday night too, right? Well, that's but DevOps, at least on the DevOps side, it's funny because they're very serious, very focused. I mean, talk
Yep,
about so there's a challenge in that part. It's
absolutely.
not all easy. I worked with one developer, really nice person, but did not talk. And so it was really a one-sided conversation because I talked too much. Someone said it was great because you sit there and it's one side of going on and on. But you get that. There is sometimes, I don't know if you found this, less communication sometimes. They're very quiet. I don't know. So there's going to have to be an adjustment there. Do you work with developers now?
uh, the team I work in currently is mostly very similar-minded people to me. So we all come from an infrastructure background, whether that is storage or backups or networks, which is interesting. We definitely do have. There are some developers and people that have more developing skills than others, um, but that the conversation for that also goes you don't have to be a developer to get into the space, and I think that's something. So we spoke earlier about what's a piece of advice to give to people that are starting, or what scares people off from starting is people think as soon as they get into the space they have to be a brilliant coder, an amazing coder, and have 1,000 get contributions every single month. And you really don't. You don't have to be a coder to get into this. But it's obviously a skill set you do need to pick up and you do need to get involved, but it's not a particular prerequisite to getting into it. That's why I say it's that marriage works really well between the developers and the infrastructure guys because you bounce off each other and you talk to each other. Like I talk to the developers and they go off and start talking about stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds really cool. Okay, cool. How can I bring what you're saying and how can I make it work with what I'm trying to do? And vice versa. You trying to deploy something. How can I get the infrastructure to a point where you can do that in an efficient and quick fashion so that I'm not hindering your process because they obviously work at the speed of lightning with their 2 week
Yeah.
sprints every time with Agile. So from a, we all love Agile. From an infrastructure perspective, to try keep up with that has been a bit of a challenge because infrastructure historically doesn't move that fast. We quite constrained and conservative, and we keep a lot to change control and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, they do as well, but there's usually I mean, you can't order a new array in 2 weeks. It takes you a bit longer to get a new array in the data center. Um,
Yeah.
so that's been a challenge, but also it's been amazing at the same time.
So one of the things I think we're probably going to round up soon, but I got one final killer question. I like the killer question. I want to put you on the spot, right? Because it's fun. What are your predictions for the future? And what we'll do is we'll
Oh,
record this, and in 3 years' time we'll come back and say, "Hey, no, I'm joking." It's just that it is difficult to predict stuff, and I have heard so many different predictions that I like to collect them. So your shot.
wow, that is putting me on the spot. Um, yeah, look, I definitely think Kubernetes is the way forward. Um, Kubernetes and automation is the way to go, 100%, and that can cross that knowledge. That knowledge can cross across on-prem, cloud, Kubernetes, whatever you're doing. You can use automation in any of it, whether you're a storage guy, backups guy, networking, doesn't matter. You can use that everywhere. And obviously, containers is becoming a lot bigger and it will continue to grow and it's growing exponentially. So now is really the time to get involved. Like you say, there's a major skill shortage for it at the moment. So now's the time really to get involved. I do, however, will say that I don't think virtualization will go away. as some people have predicted, saying, "Oh, it's the death of virtualization." I don't believe that. I think it'll be a bit of a harmony between the two, and we'll be running both in for quite a while. Same as how on-prem and cloud went. I think the virtualization and Kubernetes world will be the same.
Okay, well, if anybody else has any questions, I mean, that was great, Andre. I mean, for a first guest on this show, it was perfect. I mean, there was no moments where people were just quiet, which is wonderful. But
Oh,
does
thanks
anybody,
for having me.
you never know. I mean, because I get stage fright all the time. Does anybody else have any questions while we're still here?
I've got a question for really both of you, honestly. You know, I think you both have done one of those great jobs of the transition to this new emerging space. Um, do you feel that you've lost your quick or lost your mojo for the areas you came from, or do you feel like you can still, float and carry the full stack conversation, storage, virtualization, those types of things?
Go ahead
Uh,
first, Andre, if you want.
yeah, sure. I'll take the question. Yeah, I reckon I still get involved from a professional perspective. I still get involved in the full stack conversation as well, and I still do some work in it, just because that's how life goes. You sort of get pulled back into what you know and into previous teams. Um, I don't think that knowledge will ever go away, and it does help uh, in the Kubernetes world as well. So a lot of the work that I still do is private cloud and on-prem. So understanding the full stack and understanding how everything fits together, I don't think will ever go away.
And I'll say from my perspective, there's another angle to that too, which I think a lot of us are experiencing now. And it's that if you achieved a certain level of knowledge and experience, especially experience, the key word here, in an area like Veeam and virtualization, even if you pass all these exams, whatever, you still have this, it's the quote unquote imposter syndrome, um, working with Kubernetes, simply because it is so big and you in your previous field could just off the top of your head, boom, 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 because you've experienced, you've seen things, whereas here, no. And so there's a bit of an insecurity that arises inside yourself. You start questioning, well, am I really that smart? I thought I was. So that's one thing. As far as forgetting, I think it's like anything. It's like a language. If you don't practice, your skills won't necessarily go down, but it'll be harder to pull information back. You'll have to review, but it's much
Yeah.
faster than someone who's just never known it to begin with. What Andre said is very, very important as well, which is a difficult thing for many people. If you've achieved a level of, for instance, Veeam Vanguard and you've done the Veeam certifications, there's a huge demand for Veeam now. And so what you can encounter sometimes, luckily I don't have that here now in my present company, is okay, yeah, Kubernetes is great, but you know what? There's just this one little project, which turns out to be a huge Veeam project, and all that Kubernetes stuff just kind of goes down there. Meanwhile, you're terrified that I got to be doing Kubernetes. I mean, I'm gonna, I haven't. So that is a problem. In a way, I kind of envy somebody who's just starting out of fresh at university or fresh just on their IT journey with Kubernetes. They don't know anything else. So they can't be conveniently put. It's like you're in Major League Baseball, but you really want to play ice hockey, and you've just gotten to the major leagues, and they keep pulling you back to the baseball field. Although that's different seasons, so I don't know how that comparison works. So that's I think the thing. But I think Andre will agree that you know we're our experience is really important, and there's a worry that I need to get more quickly, a catch up. Even though there are a lot of people in that position, that's the only good thing is there are a lot of people like myself and Andre who have just recently become certified in Kubernetes. So it's not as
Mm.
if we're 10 years late.
Well,
Yeah,
my
and
next question: will somebody be too late if they don't jump on? Even a primitive knowledge, right? Will the world? I don't think, to your other points, I don't think virtualization is dead, right? I agree with that, but should the masses get at least a defendable knowledge of Kubernetes at this time?
yeah, I'd say so. I don't think it's ever too late. There's never too late to get involved in anything. You can start any journey right now, and it'll be the right time for you, right? Um, but in today's world and how things are going, I think having an understanding of how containers work, and how Kubernetes works, and just how the picture fits together, I guess, is probably a very valuable skill to have, because, like I mentioned, it's obviously not going away. So you need to understand it, and as a system administrator, you need to be able to talk to it. Um, so that's I reckon you probably in a good time now to get involved into it.
Yeah, and one thing I'll mention here, which sometimes I don't think is recognized enough, and which not fear mongering or being a scary, even though it might look scary, is remember when we move from physical machines to virtual machines, the physical machine people who knew an OS were not completely out of the picture because okay, they might not know the orchestration systems which are Hyper-V or VMware, but you put them inside the virtual machine and it's basically a physical machine to the point where even backup for a while you could use agents and physical machines and whatnot. So you weren't completely lost. And there are a lot of people who made that gradual move. They were still employable, still working, because the OS, the virtual machine, is basically a virtual physical machine. Kubernetes and containers, that's different. It's not. It's a container is basically an application which has had everything extra cut out of it. So all the in Windows Solitaire and Minesweeper programs are gone. If anything, it's similar to, I guess, is Cloud Director, used to be called vCloud Director with the vApps. So you have a vApp, that kind of thing. So that's the only thing that would scare me if I was outside right now. It's not going to be automatically, I can still function in this environment right from the get-go and then wing it. If that's fair, I don't know. I'm obviously trying to get people to go to the Cast and Learning site. You can see there. Oh my God, Jeff just said I'm going to be out of a job in 2 years. Quick, sign up.
Yeah, we need a link somewhere so I can point to it. Like, go to the custom learning site.
Yeah. On the bright side, though, I'll say it's not as difficult. It reminds me of mathematics, which I did horribly at in high school because I would skip 3 classes and go to the last class, and that's not the way mathematics works. Same thing. If you do step 1, 2, 3, it's actually quite easy. I used to have the math genius tell me, Jeff, this is so easy. Why are you so dumb? And I'd say, well, because I skipped 3 classes. So this is the same thing. You can't just, jump in here. But if you do the 1, 2, 3, 4, go to the Cast and Learning site, do Michael Cade's DevOps. It's not as difficult as, and you don't have to take the exam. I mean, we did that because we're little gluttons for punishment, or we like to have cameras on us, under the table. But you don't have to, certification is really someone's what they want,
Yeah, and
not.
it's definitely becoming easier to make the transition. That's exactly why we're having this conversation today, is to sort of start encouraging that conversation. And the Kubernetes Korner and Kasten and all that makes this a lot easier. Stuff like the 90 days of DevOps that Michael Cade did makes it a lot easier as well. And it's really opening that world. It's not tied to either being a developer or a Linux guy. It is now opening it up to the rest of the world. So it's definitely becoming easier than what it was.
I think Michael Cade owes us like a little fee or like a few beers or whatever. We've mentioned that like 4 times, so I think
Yeah, we plug it in for free. Should start charging him.
So if anybody else has any other questions or, well, this was great, Andre. For the first time, I think we did really well. I mean, we're amateurs in show business, but I think that maybe soon we'll be dropping the whole Kubernetes thing and be in Hollywood at this rate.
Yeah,
We make a lot
I
more
think
money.
so. I'll have to come join you.
But thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you next time. We'll have another really interesting guest. And yeah, thank you very much, and have a great day.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's been an honor, mate. Thank you.